Can you imagine the dilemma that Joshua faced as he tries to lead the people of Israel, God's people, into the promised land? Opposition after opposition after opposition, all kinds of potential problems lay on the horizon, yet they plowed ahead. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope this message will be helpful. Now, when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until we had crossed over, their hearts melted, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeath-Haaraloth. Now this is why he did so. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the desert on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all those people born in the desert during the journey had not. The Israelites had moved about in the desert 40 years until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land that they had been solemnly promised their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So they raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones that Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained there in the camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So the place has been called Gilgal to this day. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread, and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate of the produce of Canaan. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of them with a drawn sword in his hand, and Joshua went up to him and said, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as the commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Now let me stop and pause here. This commander is a pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. Pre-incarnate, okay? Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asking him, "What message does my Lord have for this servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy," and Joshua did so, much like the burning bush, walking in sand. Now let me offer just a snippet about how difficult it is to preach Old Testament narrative. What we get from the Old Testament narrative is lessons that were learned by those who went before us. And picking out those lessons is a challenge. It's very difficult to go through verse by verse and explain stuff, because that's not the point of those passages. The point of those passages is for us to learn the lessons that they learned and not have to learn them the hard way. Okay? Well, I think I've done that today. Our witness is based upon what? What is our witness based upon? It's based upon His power, not ours. Now, when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan came up, their hearts melted. Other folks' hearts melted. They no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. You see, we sometimes get into this idea, I do, live this way, that it's up to me. And that could not be further from the truth. It's not up to me, it's up to God. And God is always at work around us. He's always seeking to save that which is lost. He's always out there looking for that one sheep out of the 99. He's always doing that. And what He wants from us, He doesn't want us to work for Him. He wants us to walk with Him. And when we walk with Him, we will find ourselves doing His will. And it's important to realize that we are not tasked with doing this on our own. For instance, how many times have you won an argument about politics? Raise your hand. How many times? How many times have you won an argument about religion? Well, I don't see any hands up. Freddie Daniels, you'd be the only hard-headed goat I would know that would raise his hand right now.
I went to battle and I did it, though.
You did what?
I went to battle against an atheist. And when I told him about Pascal's dilemma, he said he had never thought about that. He came to me later and said he confessed with Jesus because of what I did.
That's absolutely brilliant, but you didn't win the argument.
God did.
Thank you. But again, we don't win those arguments. God declares, and great word, thank you for saying that, Freddie. A great word. In fact, God declares to us that our message is the message. And He's doing the work. One example, I try not to do this, sometimes I'm guilty of it. I don't feel like I have to preach a whole lot about sin. Because God said in John chapter 14 through 16, I will send another and He will convict the world of what? Sin and judgment and righteousness to come. It's God's job to convict people. I can't do that. Now, I've jokingly said, though sometimes it's truer than not, I have the spiritual gift of just ticking people off. But when God convicts a person's heart, that's real. And how many times have you, like Freddie's situation, that guy heard an argument that he could not dispel, and it got to him. The same story happened to the guy who led me to Christ, his son and his dad. Pascal's dilemma. What Pascal's dilemma simply stated is, suppose that all the stuff in this world is correct, and there is no God, and there is no judgment, nothing like that. What have I risked in my life? I haven't risked anything. But if the gospel is true, and I ignore the gospel truth, I've risked eternity. And that's called a fool's bet. And if you're willing to take that bet, I hope you'll never go to Las Vegas, because that's pretty idiotic. The point being is that God does the convicting. And we are to be the light of the world and the salt of the world, and we're to speak the truth in love. And Paul says we should be able to give an answer for the hope that lies within us. And having that answer available is very powerful. And it's important to realize that God does want us to walk in truth. But the message is where God's power is explained. And the cross is foolishness to those who don't believe. But it's the power of God unto salvation for those who do. The message itself brings about the transitional life a person needs in Christ. It reminds me, Freddie, of old Johnny Carson. Always had a plant in the audience. That was not a plant. Our witness is also based on His promises. You think about this for a minute. The nation of Israel was promised, when Abram was called to leave the Ur of the Chaldees, he was offered a land, and that promise has been restated to Moses and to David through time and eternity. That promise, here's this land mass we've given you. God says, I've given you this land mass. And I want to point out something. As of today, the nation of Israel has never occupied the land mass that God promised them. They've come close. At one point during David and Solomon's reign, they possessed about 80% of that land mass that was promised them. They've never possessed it all. And that tells me it's yet to happen in a millennial reign of Christ. His promise. Now think about this again. Can you imagine what the message was for all those people that were circumcised that day? The message was God's promise is still true. And the message for us is the same. God's promises are true. You can take God's promises to the bank, so to speak. It's fascinating to me. what are God's promises to us? Now, again, we have to make a distinction between promises and principles. There is a general principle out there. I mentioned this last week. There's a general principle out there that rules our culture, really. It's called karma. You get what you deserve. And that's a false message. None of us get what we deserve. What we get is what we don't deserve. And that's eternal life. God's promises are always true. And don't confuse God's promises with general principles about how life works. The book of Proverbs is filled with those principles. But they are not promises. It's wisdom literature saying from Solomon and others, if you live your life this way, you're more likely than not have a smoother, better life. And let me just say again how far I take that. Even a hardened atheist, if that hardened atheist would live by the general principles of the book of Proverbs, their life would be better than not. But living by those principles will never get you into heaven. It'll simply give you a better path to live on. And I've used this one before, bear with me again. One proverb says, do not answer a fool according to his folly. The very next proverb says, answer a fool according to his folly. Is that a contradiction? No. We are Westerners and we think linearly. What Solomon is saying in those two proverbs is there's sometimes you need to speak up and answer a fool according to their folly, and there are other times you need to not speak up and not waste your breath. And it takes great wisdom to know when to speak up and when to shut up. And I find myself having those things inverted way too often. Promises. My next point is, and he said, and I love this, after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained there until they were healed. The next our witness is based on his purpose. Then the Lord said to Joshua, today I've rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. What was the reproach of Egypt? The reproach of Egypt was that they had not been circumcised. So the place that they call Gilgal to this day, and on the evening of the 14th day of the month, while Israel camped there, the Israelites celebrated Passover. Our witness is based upon God's purposes. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain, and they ate of the produce of Canaan. Wow. And that is so significant because, again, God had promised him the land of Canaan. And he's saying here, my purposes are being fulfilled now. And God's one of the great witnesses out there that we can have, and we'll be talking more about this, I'm certain, later, is asking somebody why they're here. So why are you here? How are you adding value to our community? Why are you here? Wow. And that's a question that people outside the church are longing to have that answered. Longing to have it answered. Much like Pascal's dilemma. I'm convinced that within the very nature of humanity, there lies this big question mark. And that big question mark is, why am I here? What is the purpose and meaning of life? Nobody wants to go to the grave at the end of their journey thinking they've wasted their lives. No one wants that. Even the most hardened person in our culture does not want that. At some point, they want to know their life has mattered. And what a great opportunity that is for us to share the meaning of life. And the meaning of life is sometimes codified in ways that I can paraphrase it, but the meaning of life is to glorify God and bring honor to his name. That's simply put. That's one of the old catechisms. But the point is, the meaning of life, the purposes of God are incredibly important in our culture today, and we can use that longing need to let other people know there's a God out there who cares. And there's a church over here that cares. Our witness is also based upon his presence. Think about that. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw the man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand, and Joshua said, "Are you one for us or our enemies?" Wow. You see, one of the age-old questions that David the psalmist answered was, where can I go from you and not be in your presence? Psalm 139 maps that out beautifully. And David concludes, whether I go to the grave, wherever I am, God is there. Understanding the power of God's presence. And I think about this. You know, one of the things I think is so interesting in our culture today, I remember many, many years ago hearing an old song, and some of you will know it better than I do, I'm sure. I don't remember the words to it much at all. But the scene was a drive-in movie. And I forget what movie it was. But the song playing in the background, which was by design, was God is going to get you for that. That's playing in the background. And the point being is that these people, for somehow, the message I got from that was, wherever you are, wherever I am, God is present. And understanding how impactful that can be as we live out our lives now. You know, I've said so many times, when you go to work, you're not just going to work. You're taking the very presence of God into your workplace. When you go play, you're not just playing. You're taking the very presence of God into where you play. And that's incredibly important for us to wrap our hands around, our minds around that. It's life-changing if we can grab that truth. He says, "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." Then Joshua fell down on his face in reverence. A scene very much like Moses in the burning bush. In the Old Testament, the presence of God was manifested in a way that was so frightening and so scary that the natural reaction people had was to hide their face. You remember when Moses came off the mountain? He was masked. Why was that? Some have said because when the glory of God was going to leave, he didn't want people to know he left. That may have been true too. But the point being here is that God's presence is so powerful. He says, then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." Now, how does that translate into our lives today in the New Testament? Paul says that we are the temple of God. His presence in our lives is the presence of God in the world. Whoa. And we are on holy ground when we grasp the truth that we are carrying the presence of God with us 24/7, every day of the year. And that is so empowering and so powerful and so humbling. Wow. You see, his witness is based upon his power, his promise, his purpose, and His presence. Our witness is based on that. So how can we go wrong? We've seen in this message God's promises are faithful and true. If we can help you in any way along your spiritual journey, feel free to give us a call at 252-237-4616. We'll be glad to talk with you about this or anything else related to your spiritual journey. God bless you and have a great week.